So Clark goes by he, him, is from New York, and says the argument they have an argument for the existence of God, the divine conceptualist argument. All right, Clark, you're on. Tell us about the divine conceptualist argument.
Yeah, so the divine conceptualist argument is establishing the necessity of propositions. And the idea is that if propositions exist necessarily, then an essential attribute of any proposition is going to be that it has an aboutness relation, which means it has some property of intentionality. And that would be analytically identical to mental content or mind. So the idea is that if there are necessarily existing propositions, then there's going to be a necessarily existing mind. And I can give you the deductive argument that establishes the truth of this proposition.
Let's start with a rephrase just so that I'm sure that I'm understanding what you're saying, okay? Sound good?
Okay.
So you're saying that the existence of a proposition, like anybody saying that a thing is true, requires a mind. Is that accurate? I'm sure that that's simplifying a little bit.
No, I'm saying that the existence of a proposition is identical to a mind. And it wouldn't just be one proposition, it would be all propositions that are necessary.
Okay. What does a proposition mean in this sense?
A proposition is going to be a declarative statement that has truth values. Now, I'm making a claim that certain propositions are going to be necessary, not that all propositions are going to be necessary, but all the propositions that are necessary are going to be identical to a mind.
So what is, I'm kind of confused, identical to a mind, like a thinking, feeling, entity? Is that what you're saying? It's because that's my interpretation of a mind, and that a proposition would then be identical to, or a group of propositions would be identical to like a thinking, feeling entity. Is that kind of what you're saying? Or am I not understanding what you mean by mind here?
So yeah, that would be a sufficient condition for a mind, that it is thinking and feeling. But I think a necessary condition, and the one I'm pointing to, is going to be intentionality, which is just going to be that property of aboutness that is going to be a necessary feature of any mind, but it's also going to be a necessary feature of any necessary proposition. So that's what the argument is establishing, that these necessary propositions are identical to a necessary mind.
So there must be a thinking and feeling thing, and by the existence of that thinking and feeling thing, it must be intentional?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there must be a necessarily existing proposition, and in virtue of there being a necessarily existing proposition, and an essential attribute of that necessarily existing proposition is going to be intentionality, which is analytically identical to a mental state, because that would be a necessary feature of any mental state as well, would be intentionality. So it's just an abductive inference that I'm making there in virtue of those same essential attributes that are present in both the proposition that is necessary and any mental state.
To be honest, this is a bit word salady. So I'm going to just ask the first most obvious question. Why is a proposition necessarily existent? Why must any proposition exist?
So again, I'm not saying that all propositions are necessary. I'm saying that there is at least one necessary proposition. And the reason why it's necessary is because the negation of the proposition would entail a contradiction. I'm talking about logical necessity. So an example of a necessary proposition would be a ball can't be fully red and fully blue, because it's analytically identical that what it means for a ball to be fully red is that it excludes it from being fully blue. And same as it being fully blue would exclude it from being fully red. That's the predicate concept of that proposition. So that means in all
so you're saying that because
that proposition is true.
Yeah, a thing exists and is true, propositions are necessary?
No. Again, I gave you an example of a necessary proposition because it's a type of proposition that cannot not be true. It's true in all possible worlds because the negation of the proposition entails a contradiction, which is a conjunction of two propositions that evaluates to false in all possible worlds. This is basic logic.
Oh, so I must be so dumb. Hey, Christy, can you make something out of this?
Yeah, I mean, sure. What I'm sort of understanding, Clark, is that because, for instance, like numbers exist and they're consistent and they seem to be universal, there has to be some sort of underlying source code underpinning the universe to keep all of that straight, to make all of that happen. Because we can acknowledge that these essential propositions exist, that necessarily there must be some sort of mind, some sort of will holding it together. Is that at all fair?
No, that's a complete straw man of my argument, actually.
Okay, I'm going to actually read your argument as I find it online. I'm going to mute you for a second because you're starting to fall into like accusations about us that, oh, this is basic logic, that's a straw man. We're genuinely engaging in this with good faith and trying very hard to understand what you're saying. So I've looked up.
It seems like a justification for like the first part of the kalam, like this notion of mind.
Yeah, so I actually looked up the divine conceptualist argument for God's existence from necessary truth. And there are, I'm not going to go through every single premise, but I'm going to start just with the description of mind, and then we can come back in and see like what you think of that, okay? So I muted you for a second. I'm going to unmute you now, but I'm going to have you, listen to this bit. All right. And we're not going to do name calling and accusations. All right. Because we really are trying to understand this. So what I'm seeing here, premise 1, there are necessary truths. First off, it has the premise that, and that's kind of, it feels like what you were describing about saying a ball is red or it is blue. Cats are mammals, triangles have 3 sides. These are described as necessary truths, which are true in all possible situations, or to use world semantics is what this says, true in all possible worlds. So we're just assuming there are necessary truths. Premise 2, truth is a property of propositions which are inherently intentional. That is, they are about whether some state of affairs, this says obtains or not. And the way that I would kind of process that is that, like, if we're making a proposition that is based on a necessary truth, then we're being intentional about doing that. And those things must have come into existence with some intentionality. And then premise 3 kind of goes with this. Inherently intentional propositions are best understood as thoughts. So if something is inherently intentional, then it would be purposeful and could be understood as a thought. And premise 4 is that thoughts require a mind. Leading to premise 5, necessary truths exist as thoughts or a mind of minds. All right. So with it being stated that way, is that kind of what we're trying to get at here, Clark?
It's a very similar argument. I would accept using that argument because it's very similar to mine, but I want to clear up some few important points of clarification. So number 1, it's not assumed that there are necessary truths. It's deduced. It is the case that there are necessary truths in virtue of the argument that you just read being sound, meaning that it's logically valid and the premises are true. So premise 1 would have a hidden premise, meaning there'd be a separate argument for the claim that there are necessary truths. It's not just assumed. And also,
I think for the purpose of this argument, that's how a premise works, though. Okay.
Me?
I think for the purpose of this argument, we're assuming that to go forward. I'm not declaring that it is assumed in all situations, but that's what a premise sort of is that we're operating as though these are true for the purpose of this argument, right? So from my perspective, we're assuming it to continue with this conversation. That's why I would use that terminology.
Yeah, so it's not going to be the case that for all logical arguments, the premises that are contained within the form of each logical argument are going to be assumed. I just don't take that to be the case. But
okay, I never said that, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, let's go to the next thing you were saying.
It's not the case that premise 1 is assumed. Yeah, so the obtained there is meant to be referring to it being actualized in some possible world. This is why it's important to have philosophical training if you're going to engage with a formal argument. Because these are very technical philosophical terms, right? So you need to be able to...
So not basic logic.
Yeah, I thought you said it was basic logic.
It is basic logic, but it's clear you don't know basic logic, right? This is modal logic. Very easy to understand, and the implications are very clear.
Let's have a quick chat. I'm going to mute you again because we're struggling to talk like a person here. You have no idea if I have any training in basic logic or not. It is entirely possible that I have quite a bit, but because I don't agree with you, we're coming out with this, you clearly don't understand this is basic logic kind of thing. That's just getting nasty. And I don't have any real interest in nastiness. Like I said, we're engaging in this best we can, trying to understand. It was a little cheeky for me to say, I thought you said this was all basic logic, but it's a little hard to engage in a logical argument where someone is saying this is basic and you must understand these complex terms and have training to engage in it. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to this idea that if something is true and it's something that should seem basic, to understand should be pretty basic to discuss. So this is the second time I've muted you. I'm going to do a 3 strikes you're out thing here. I am actually enjoying engaging with this idea, and I would like to continue enjoying you, but let's try that again. So we're just looking at you, what argument you are making here, and all I was trying to do here was get to the idea and the definition of a mind. So looking at propositions being something that are intentional because they have to be something that is understood. They basically they require mind. Necessary truths exist as thoughts or a mind of minds. Can we even get that far?
Sure. I think we need to clarify what you think intentionality means there, because it seems like you don't understand what intentionality is referring to. It's not a dig on you, but it's just the point of
that was fine. I think you might be right. Let's clarify that.
Yeah, intentionality is referring to a property of aboutness, which specifically is a relational property because it's normative, which means that it's irreducible. Are you following that? So,
aboutness. I've never encountered this term. Tell me about it.
So I just explained that to you. So yeah, the property of aboutness is going to be referring to a relational property, which in philosophy, all relational properties are non-monadic predicates. Do you know the distinction between a predicate and a property?
Again, we're getting to word salad. So I think that I'm going to say the Einstein thing.
Like you're just not equipped.
If you cannot explain it to a 5th grader, you don't understand it. We're going to go the Einstein route. Okay. So let's go with that route. You're already treating me a little like I'm dumb. So treat me like I'm real dumb. How do you say this to a real dumb person?
Well, look, I understand that you're implicitly conceding that you're